Well, adequately funding cultural institutions and landmarks is an issue for many countries, and museums are often at the forefront of those struggles. For more, let's bring in Joanna Woronkowicz from the School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Joanna, let's start with a look at some of the challenges the industry faces when it comes to charging customers when you have lots of free museums, especially in cities like Washington, D.C.
Absolutely. I think especially in Washington, D.C., you see different museums both charging admission and not charging admission. And those who do charge admission believe that if they could stimulate attendance if they just didn't have to charge admission. That's definitely one of the challenges.
Now, in terms of how these things are actually funded, the majority of U.S. museums are actually nonprofits, which does help when it comes to their tax burden. But what about the main sources of funding? What are they relying on?
The main sources of funding for nonprofit museums tend to be individual donations. Government funding does make up a piece of the pie. Corporate funding does, as well as earned revenue, which includes admission fees.
Now, is that sustainable long term, or is it going to come to a point where museums are all going to have to start charging or asking for these suggested donations?
You know, I think it is sustainable long term to rely on admissions, and it really just differs based on the type of museum you have and the different revenue structures different museums use.
Now, in terms of some of these structures, let's also look at the operating budget. On average, how much of that operating budget do these entrance fees and suggested donations make up?
So there's a large range, but on average, I've seen figures about 6%.
Okay, and so when it comes to charging these customers, is it better for the museum staff then to have people actually paying these fees? Does it actually make a difference when it comes to those compared to the free museums, let's say?
You know, there's a lot of good reasons to charge an admission fee. One of those reasons is obviously just because admission fees make up a piece of the revenue pie. So admission fees help actually cover the costs at a museum, and I think that's the biggest reason. The other reason for charging admission fees is that it actually helps place a value on the cultural experience patrons have at a museum.
And speaking of that value, clearly museums are a part of preserving the culture and the heritage, as you were saying, and U.S. museums actually protect an estimated 1 billion artifacts. So clearly there are some benefits, but what about the financial benefits? Do we still need people to build museums, or should we stop at this point?
You know, I think we definitely still need people to build museums, but they need to be building museums for good reasons. And I think the best reason to build a museum is if there's sufficient demand for a museum. So from a city leader's perspective, understanding whether or not people will actually come to that museum before the museum is built, I think, is key.
Now, one could argue that even though they are protecting these artifacts and bringing some money in, by some estimates, the American Alliance of Museums claims that for every $1 invested in museums and other cultural organizations, $7 is returned in tax revenues. So what do you think is the biggest reluctance for people paying these fees if eventually it gets pumped back into the economy?
You know, I think there's debate on whether or not there is that type of impact that fees cause. So I think that's actually still up for debate. But, you know, I think one of the biggest reasons that people argue against fees is that the taxpayers are already paying for the tax subsidy that nonprofits receive. And so in a sense, this is sort of a double jeopardy if they're asked to pay a fee again.
Well, everyone certainly likes free. We're going to have to leave it there. Joanna Woronkowicz from the University of Indiana.
If you like what you just saw, follow us on social media and visit our website, cctv-america.com.